All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here with me. I should have the live transcript enabled. I think you can turn it on and off. Cool. Um, Other things, yeah, this is our first class together, so just kind of wanted to set the tone from my point of view. Um, yeah, I want y'all to like think of this class as like a safe space to kind of experiment, to be wrong, right? I want you to think of this as like a place where we're going to have like collective curiosity, and part of getting things wrong is getting closer to getting it right. And I want you to know that like I don't have any care for being right, to be honest. Like if you notice I say something and you're like, I don't think that's quite right, please point that out, because that helps us get it right as a whole, as opposed to me thinking I'm just always right or trying to be right. Like that's not useful for anyone. um, and yeah, I think that like just kind of like be okay with failure, be okay with kind of risk and vulnerability here. You're always gonna, hear whatever I genuinely think about your response in a kind way, and I'm never gonna like. I don't really expect you to be getting things right, but I do expect you to stay engaged and offer up what you know at this moment, because that helps us kind of like grow. And there's a ton of studies about like getting it wrong first actually helps retention, for actually getting it right next. um, and yeah, I want this to be an enjoyable experience for y'all while you're here, right? We only have so many classes, and I know I enjoy them. I want y'all to enjoy them, and I encourage you all to give feedback on these classes. I think you all might have done the class surveys last mod. We haven't. I don't think we've done one yet, but we'll have one at the end of this class. And yeah, that's kind of, you should probably know the format. I don't think it's changed in mod 3, but encourage you to give feedback on what you thought and how you wished it had gone better or what you liked. Cool. um any like questions about that? Oh, one other thing before we get to that. I'll like kind of monitor the chat, but like not really, kind of deal. Like I'll look at it sometimes, but it's not going to be like the main thing. So I just encourage you to kind of like use the raise hand or speak up, if I'm not like stopping, and be like, hey, I just wanted to check in about whatever it is. Sound good? Any questions? Okay, cool. Um, yeah, so the we're gonna start. The lesson is linked in the calendar, um, but I wanted to start with the request response cycle and kind of just like the basic high level like parts of a request and a response. I know that that was part of your intermission work for mod 3, so I would love to kind of just poll y'all and have anyone give me. We can start with the request. Anyone give me any parts of the request that are coming to mind. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to share and I'm going to write these out so we have them. Oh, Zoom, you're always in my way. All right, nice little feature. If you don't know about it, docs.new will give you a brand new Google Doc. You can also use sheets.new, right there in the browser. So let's say HTTP request response cycle. We'll just call this request response parts. Um, yeah, let's make this bigger. Okay, who's got something for me for the request, parts of the request? Nobody, huh? I know y'all learn this stuff. I know you know. All right, Ben, what's up?
I think one of the new things that we were introduced to is that like DNS lookup when you first create the request.
Yep. So that's kind of like what happens when you send the request. That's like one of the first things that happens is the DNS lookup. But we need the request to be formatted in a certain way before we can even kind of like get to the part where it's like, okay, now it's time to go. Let's do the DNS lookup, find the server, see if we can get a response. But yeah, that's that. I would say DNS lookup would be the first thing that happens when you send it. Cool. I gotta get the participants panel because I don't know who was first. Participants. Okay, looks like Hope. Go ahead, Hope.
A verb.
Yeah. All right. So we've got a verb. What's an example of a verb?
Gets used most often, but post, push, post, put, delete.
Cool. I like it. Yep. These are all, get is used most often. But we also have these other verbs, right? That, we can send data, we can delete data. Cool. And then any other parts of the request? Let's go to Jake.
I was going to say that it gets translated into a string, but I think we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. So I'm going to like kind of circumvent the cycle in this and just kind of like focus on the anatomy of the request and the response.
Okay.
So I guess we're like, what I should have said is we're not going to get to the cycle today. We're not going to talk much about the cycle, but I'm glad y'all are thinking about it. We're just going to talk about the parts that are necessary to be kind of like all formatted for us to send a request. Do you want to try to give me one, Jake?
I mean, if it's following NVC protocol, the next thing we do would have to hit the controller, but I'm not sure if that's the appropriate thing here.
Cool. Yeah, if we were thinking about the whole cycle, then yeah, you could say like, yeah, it's got to hit the server, and where does it hit? I would say router first, right? It's going to hit that routes file, which is going to tell it like where to route to.
Okay.
But yeah, but I'm probably like I'm gonna say let's try one more part of the request. Like, so this is like thinking about like just formatting it. Let's go to Trevor.
The verb would come first, and then it would follow with the URI.
Yeah.
And then the controller in action.
So yeah, controller action is actually server side. So this is like HTTP is our protocol, right? Like this is kind of outside of the idea of like MVC principles. That's like a Rails pattern, common like server side pattern. But we're thinking like HTTP. I want y'all to think of like as a separate protocol that like works in a specific way. And to be completely honest, it's mostly abstracted away from y'all. From like the client abstracts it away, like your browser abstracts away like a lot of what's going on, and then the server abstracts it away as well and like is able to send you the response. But yeah, so with this with the URI, that's going to be like part of what we call like the request line. And basically these two things kind of work in conjunction with each other. So I'll do this request line. So we have a verb, and then we have the URI, which is like the path to where we want to go, basically. Like, hey, where should this request try to go to on the server? Cool. And yeah, there's one other part of this request line. I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at it. Jake, you still got your hand up?
Let me put it down.
You're like, no,
But,
it is down now. No, but go ahead.
I'm looking things up as we're talking about it.
Cool.
So it looks like a start line describing the request to be implemented.
Yep. Yeah, so that's a good definition of the request line. The other
I don't know
part,
what that means, by the way.
Yeah, so it's kind of like thinking about like this is like the request line is kind of like part one here. I would love if I could do this and then change these to bullets. Cool. So the request line is kind of like you can think of the request as three parts, and the request line is the first part. Has the verb, the URI, and we'll say that this example is what? This would be like, hey, like let's go to like authors one or something like that. And we got another hand, so I'm gonna go to Alex.
My guess for the last part is HTTP version.
Yeah. Yep. So, and we'll call that the HTTP protocol, but version works too. So this could be like something. This would be like I don't know. 1.1 is the I think original, or one that we can like definitely depend on. So let's say 1.1, and then it could be or like it could be 2.0, I think is the next one, I believe. Yeah, and so and we're not going to get into like the intricacies of like which HTTP version we're using. Just know that they work slightly differently under the hood in the way that they like transfer information and like how many connections they open with the server. That's not that important, but just know that like the parts that are important that you know, because this could be an interview question, right? It's like request line, and the request line has three parts. It's the verb, like what action am I taking, the URI, or you could even say like the URL, because in 1.1 and 2.0 work a little differently, but like 1.1, the URI is passed here in the line, and then the actual domain is passed as a header called host. All right, so it's a little bit different the way that 1.1 and 2.0 work, whereas in 2.0 you could pass like the entire URL in the request line. So slight nuance there, but like I don't think they're going to be, if they're drilling you on 1.1 or 2.0, you can just say like I don't know the nuances, and that's okay for y'all. And then the protocol. So it's got to be like you got to tell us what protocol of HTTP that you're using, and that's 1.1 or 2.0 in general. Okay. Other questions like that you're thinking about or that are coming up based on what I just said? All right, let's talk about response parts. Actually, we're not going to response yet. We still got two more request parts. Will you work this way? No, that's okay. Okay. Final request parts. We got two more. Any ideas? Yeah, go ahead, Genevieve.
The header and the body?
Yeah, love it. Okay, so I believe it is called like header. Like this is a request header, singular, but like the thing about it is there's going to be headers. There's going to be multiple of them. But like when we refer to the part, we call it the header. And then we have the body, and the body is like not always included, but like if you're doing a get, there's no body, right? So let's just say optional, because it is optional. And if you're doing a get, you don't need a body, but if you're sending a post, generally you want some data in that body, right, that you're going to send over the server and let the server do something with, generally like create some resource. And then the header, like I want you to think of the header as like, we call it singular, which is kind of weird, but there's generally going to be multiple of these. So let me put that too. Generally more than one. Okay, cool. Any questions or disagreements with this? Yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
Hey, Tim. So for body, you said like for post, would it also be for maybe update?
Yeah, absolutely. But for update, what verbs do we use for update?
Put or patch?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so another thing to consider here is like the difference between like HTTP verbs, or really you can call it a verb or a method, and our CRUD actions, right? Like CRUD actions, our update kind of corresponds with a put patch, but when we're talking about just HTTP, it's important to kind of like, this is like an important difference that I want you all to like be thinking about in the way that you use your technical language. Because again, interviews, like this is something that you want to have kind of like nailed down, at least the basics, just the basics.
Yeah, we wouldn't use update basically because like an action hasn't happened, only the verb has, or
Well, we're the way that I think about it is we're just talking about HTTP, and HTTP doesn't care about how you've designed your server side actions. Like, yeah, it generally will respond to, or it will generally sync up with the CRUD action of an update if it's a put or a patch, but like not necessarily, right? Like you could have it designed differently.
totally.
Yeah, so it's kind of like just thinking about them separately. Yeah, go ahead, Angel.
Can you explain what the header is? Like, can you go more in depth?
Yeah, they're basically like key value pairs. So if I open up the backend site and let's go to the network. And all right, so I've got the dev tools open. I'm going to make a GET request to the backend site, which is this lesson. Cool. And here, if I look here at this request, now if I click on like where I went to grab this page from, looks like Google Analytics is like doing some stuff behind the hood, but you can see like my URL is like in there. It's in there if you kind of like dig through it, but like this is the general. And then if I look at my headers, request headers, we've got key value pairs is essentially what they are. We've got this authority, we've got this method, we got the path, we've got the scheme, we've got these content types. So this is like what we refer to as header, but like I said, there's multiple of them. There are plural of them, and they come across as basically key value pairs over to the server from the client side. Is that helpful? Did I answer it?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah, and it's okay to like kind of be like, oh, there's a lot of stuff I don't understand. There's a lot of stuff I don't understand about like the type of headers. I know some of the basic ones, but like there's a lot of stuff going on in here that like I don't necessarily need to know. There are some headers that usually come across in like every request, and like I'm familiar with a lot of those. So like origin, which is like the base URL here, is generally in 1.1, one that's going to come across all the time. User agent, so it's kind of like telling me which browser that I'm going to use, or that I could use, or that I have used in the past. Like there's kind of a lot going in here. And then content type. So what content type do I expect to both pass, or both I'm kind of telling the server, hey, I expect, this type of content to come back. And here it's like plain text. Yeah, those are going to be in there like with all of them. I've got this content type JSON being passed, but I think that's because I have this like in a cookie that is like not relevant to this site. I think let me see if I can get these controls out of the way and show y'all. Okay. So I think I have this like extension somewhere and I'm passing like a cookie. Yeah. So I have this extension in Chrome where like I can set some headers and explicitly like send those in my request. And so I have this content type application JSON from like a previous thing that I was doing. If I get rid of this and then close this extension. Now, if I do this request again, I think it will not be there. I don't expect it to be there at least. Yeah, and it's not. So, cool thing to note, there's extensions that allow you to set some headers in the browser that usually you wouldn't be able to set, whereas there are tools like Faraday and Postman, which we're going to get into today, that do like part of their built-in functionality is to allow you to set some headers and send them across, because sometimes you're going to need to. Cool. All right, we got a lot of questions. Love it. Doug, what's up?
So just kind of going back to a little bit of what Jordan was asking about, you'd mentioned that GET responses don't have a body. Is that because GET responses don't have a body, or because of the actions that we typically link to a GET response?
So I want to clarify, GET requests don't have a body, because a GET request is simply asking for a resource. It's not sending any data that the server then needs to do anything with, which would be the case if we were sending a post or a patch or a put, right? Like generally we send a payload of data in the body, all right? And so that is the thing I want to point out is like a GET. That's why the body is optional in HTTP, because you're not always going to have data to send. GET is the best example. GET is like, give me the resource. I sent you the request line, I sent you the header, and that's all you need. And now return me the resource. Whereas post, it's like, no. Now I send you the request line, the header, and I send you a payload of data. Now you do something with the data, then give me the response. Helpful?
Yeah, I think so. But to clarify, the body isn't linked to specific types of requests. Like technically I could push a body with a GET if I wanted to.
Yeah, you could. Yep. Generally wouldn't work, but you could. Cool. All right, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just it was a small question about in that the developer tools, there was a section for the query string parameters, and I noticed that like for the backend site when you were looking around on that, and I noticed that like I didn't see any of those in the actual URL. So are they like hidden, or is there some fancy stuff going on, or is that just kind of like a generalized behavior?
So there aren't any in this particular URL. Query string parameters will come across after a question mark here, and then they come across as key value pairs in the URL itself. All right, and so this is a way that you can send data, right, where you're basically circumventing the body by sending some params in the URL itself. There aren't any in here, so I'm not sure like which params that you were thinking that you saw on this.
I think if you scroll down, there's a section in there. Yeah.
Cool.
So is that just kind of like general HTTP stuff?
To be honest, am not sure where this is. Oh, I think that this is from Google. Yeah, okay. So basically what's happening is because Google Analytics, like if we look back at my original URL here, this like the way that like Google is doing a lot of stuff kind of like behind the scenes, where the first URL is actually this like Google Analytics, but then you can see this question mark come in here, and then all of these query params start. But that is abstracted away from us because we like only are seeing this URL here. So all of that is happening kind of like behind the scenes, and is a way for Google to like track something about like the data that, or the user, the data that's kind of like being passed back and forth on the site, and like other things like how many times people are visiting the site. But this is all abstracted away, right? This is Google's way of like doing that behind the scenes. So yeah, now if I inspect it, it's like a little confusing because you're like, what? Like I thought there weren't any query params, and so did I. But if we look here, it's basically like, hey, we're going to send all this information to Google Analytics, and we're going to abstract all of that happening away from you. But yeah, you can see the question mark starts here, and then it's just key value pairs, like one after another, separated by these ampersands. So every ampersand is separating a key value pair. Good question.
And then I had one other small one of, I've noticed that spaces are sometimes or like the percentage signs are sometimes represented versus the plus sign. Is it based on the browser or like the
Now
encoding type?
I forget what %20 means, but it's like there's certain characters that don't, like, servers can't read, basically.
Oh,
So the %20 stands in for them, and the percent other things, like, to be honest, I don't remember what they are, but I'm sure
okay.
Google and like find out what character that's standing in for. But it's basically like a way to like send it over in a way that the server can then parse and understand. Cool. All good questions so far. Appreciate them. Yeah, we've been going like 26 minutes. Let's take a break. Come back at 31.
Thank you, 31.
Thanks, 31. All right, it's 31. Let's jump back into it. One thing to note, I just changed this. I had push here before. That is a mistake. That's not what we want. That's not an HTTP verb. That's just me screwing up. So put is what I wanted to have here as an example. Okay, let's talk about the response parts. Anyone have any response parts, anatomy of the response that they want to push me to write here? Probably should have this up. Cool. Yeah, Katie, go ahead.
Okay, so for the response, we have the head and the body. And then for the head, inside of that, we would have like what the status code is, if it's a 200, 300, 400, and then there's some other parts too. I don't know how much you want me to go into.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm liking this, so whatever else you got.
Okay. So you'll get the status code back, typically a response, and the length of your response. And
Okay.
then I think a content type.
Yeah, okay, I see where you're going with this. So
Yeah.
the things that I want to think about here are, how do I want to say this? Yeah, okay. So we'll break this down a little bit further. So if we think about our response parts, we're going to have, it's going to be very similar to the request. There's going to be 3 of them. So let's look at the first one as a status line, okay? And this is going to be similar to the request line, and it's going to have a couple parts. And one of them will be status code. It'll have like the coded response, like what is it called? So it'll have the status line, and then the status line basically gives you the code and then tells you like, hey, what happened here? Like, was it okay? Like 200 is okay, and then like 500 would be like internal server error. So it's going to give you like, hey, what happened? What was the code that the server responded with, right? And it'll also have the protocol that the server responded with. So this could be like similar to 1.1 or 2.0. And then the body is a part. The body is kind of like the last part. So I'm going to do one more here. And again, the response has a header as well, which is going to be multiple, right? It's generally going to be more than one. And then the body is going to be like what data was sent back to us for the browser to then interpret, right? And so the big thing I want you to look at here is the body could be like, could be text. Let's do this example thing. Text could be HTML, could be JSON, right? So the body can take many forms, and generally, like what Katie was kind of getting to with this like content type, the content type of the body will generally be in here as part of the header. So content type defines the body type, what the data in the body, or we should say how the data in the body is structured. Cool, we got some hands. Yeah, let's go to Kyle.
Like if there was a redirect, where would that come in and sort of, where would that be delivered?
I don't know off the top of my head. It comes in as part of the status code, I believe. And I think it's like 302 or something like that, which like indicates like, hey, this like request got redirected, but I'm not sure if like it also, like if we also get like this, then the subsequent status of like, hey, this redirected and it was okay, so 200, or this redirected, then I got my internal server error. Not sure totally on that one, but I know that like it would come across as part of the status code, so part of the status line. Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to double check. So then the content type, that's similar also in the request as well, right? It would, for the header, it would just define the structure for the request, just like it does in the response.
Yeah, I should clarify this. Content type will do something. This is better to be kind of like put here. Like content type will tell you like text, HTML, JSON, and then body will be formatted. Like if it's going to be JSON, it would be something like this. Like it would be like key value, and then it comes across as a string. So this would be an example of JSON. Then if it's going to be HTML, it would look different, right? It would be like doc type, HTML, and then it would be like the entire HTML document. So like that's going to be the difference there of like what the body looks like, whereas the header of content type is going to define how the body's structured. And then I feel like I'm like getting on my own thing. So can you ask your question one more time?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that it's the same in the request as it is in the response. For the header, the content type, it would be, I guess, like the same thing. Like you would see the content type as either text, HTML, or JSON in the request as you would in the response?
Generally, yes.
Okay.
But like not always. Like sometimes these things can be like mismatched, right? And if you have mismatched content types, then sometimes the server can respond to that and like figure it out on its own, and sometimes it cannot. Sometimes it's like, nope, sorry, you told me you were sending JSON, but I can't really do anything with JSON, and I can't respond with JSON. I only have the ability to respond with text or HTML or whatever it is. So like now we get like an error because of that. So like it's not like I always try to avoid the words always and never in programming, because that's like almost never the case, that it's like it's always this way. It's like, no, like generally yes, the content types will match up if you've like structured everything correctly, and but like there's times when it is mismatched.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, this is pretty much all that I wanted to kind of like get into, but I'm glad we did, because we spent more time than I expected on this, but that's okay, because this is going to correspond to like this is going to really tie into how our APIs behave and how we consume them, and then later on how we expose them based on these very like on these basic like anatomical parts of the HTTP request and response. All right, so what do we want to do now? Yeah, I think I want to just show you like the different types of clients to hit an API. So again, like these APIs, we're using HTTP to hit the APIs, right? And the difference here now is all of these tools are going to use HTTP, but they're all going to work slightly differently in how we hit these APIs. All right. So first, what I'm going to do is right here in the browser. So let's see, what API do I want to hit? Probably this GitHub API. Let's see. Yeah. All right. So I told you, I asked you if you wanted to do this in Postman, but I want to show you it in all of our clients because with the one that we're most used to here is going to be our browser. The heck, you didn't copy? Okay, cool. So I'm going to put in my username and I'm going to send this. Now, when I hit enter, it's doing a lot of this like formatting of the request for me, right? Like the headers are behind the scenes. The like using the get verb is like the default get verb when I hit enter in the URL. So that's behind the scenes. And then my body is empty. Like I don't need a body. So when I hit this, great. I get a JSON response, right? And if I want to inspect in my browser the parts of my request, the parts of my response, well, we were just doing it in the dev tools. I can do that right here. Now, if I don't have them open, this is kind of like a quirky thing about the dev tools. I have to like send the request again because I have to have the dev tools open for them to actually like start paying attention, basically. Cool. That is not what I expected. Okay, there we go. Cool. So here we go. We have a status 304, which is slightly different. That tells me, I don't know what a 304 is actually. 304 status code. Not modified. Okay, so that tells me that I think it's cached. Yeah, okay, cool. So 304 not modified basically is telling me like, hey, you already sent this response once. I went to the server, I loaded up all the data. Now I've cached that response. And since the data wasn't modified, I'm going to give you the cache version, which is basically going to be much faster the second time around. We're going to get into caching later in the mod, but just a little tidbit there. And this is giving me a JSON response. If I want to see like all of the things that were passed, like as part of my request, I can kind of like go in here. I can look, you can see the response headers. If I drop this down, great. I can see and so one thing to pay attention to here, content type is application/JSON, and that indeed matches up with the body of my response. All right, so these are like some of the basic things I kind of want you to be like grabbing from this. Yeah, I can look at my response body if like I want to right here in this response tab. This shows the body of it. And all this is key value pairs in JSON telling you about my profile. Cool, so let's look at this in Postman now. All right, I've got Postman loaded up. This is not what I want, so I'm going to start a new request. I can do that by hitting this little plus sign here. Cool, untitled request. I can, I think there's a way that I can like edit this, but I'm not seeing it here right now. So, okay, so here is my URL. We're going to type in the same one with my GitHub username. Now, I have a lot of options here that are different than the browser. And what I'll say is like, I can just send this right now and it's going to work, but I don't want to necessarily do that just yet. I want you to see like, hey, I can add query params here. And I think we were talking about this with Ben. Like I can add these as key value pairs right here. If I wanted to say like, maybe like ID of 1. And you can see it just adds those right onto the URL right there. It adds them right into the end of the URL automatically, and kind of formats them how I want them, or how they need to be formatted, I should say. Great, that's something I could do. I don't actually want to pass those, so I'm not going to. But I can look at my headers, and here are some default headers that Postman automatically is setting by default for me, right? It's like, hey, these are the ones that we like definitely need you to have, and here are the things. Here are the headers that we set by default. If I need to add a header for any reason, I can just add it right here as another key value pair. Maybe I want to do like content type. My tab didn't work there. I guess I do have to click it. And I want to say like application JSON. Great, I can add that. That's for, I don't necessarily need it right here, because the way that the API works is like this content type doesn't need to be specified in the request. It will come back as part of the response, but I can add it here if I need to. And then if I need to send a payload of data, which again, I don't need to here, I can send that in a multitude of different ways, right? I can say none. I can send it as form data, which y'all have been doing all in mod 2. Anytime you sent anytime you filled out a form in your browser, you sent it across, you sent some form data. So you have the ability to do that right here in Postman, which is nice. Cool, so let me make sure that I don't have anything I don't need. Let's see if this actually, I don't think this content type will screw it up, but maybe it will. But let's send it. Okay, it doesn't. Indeed, I get my body of my request. I can see the headers here of my, or I should say, I get the body of my response. We're going to focus on technical language. I screwed up too. You can see my status code over here, how much time it took, the payload size of the response coming back. And I can look at this pretty. I can look at it raw, right? I can check out all the response headers that came back. Great. You don't need to like necessarily know what these are or what they're doing. You might need to know a few at certain times, but you can see there's quite a few here that GitHub is sending back from its API. Any questions on like this layout, anything I've said? Okay, quick tangent, actually. I'm just remembering now that I wanted to show you all this. So last night I was like resetting the server on Heroku for this pets API that y'all are going to use as part of this lesson. And I was like, man, I know I've done this before, but I can't remember the command to like do what command I need here. So couple of things. In terminal, you have this history command, which is great. Displays like the history of all the things that you've run in your terminal. Cool. But I needed to search for some specific terms within my history, right? So I Googled it and I was like, okay, how do I do this? And here's a command line thing to do. So some cases you might want to display commands containing your search term. So here's what I'll do. I'll copy this, and my search term was actually not going to be Git. It was going to be Heroku run rake. And so if I hit that, now I've searched my entire history for certain commands, and I looked and I was like, which is it? Oh yeah, I needed to pass this flag over here to my app. It's this one. All right, quick little fun command line thing that can help you out. And once again, that command was history. Then you had your, why can't I ever remember what this is called? Your block. No, it's not called that. What's that thing called?
Pipe.
Pipe. It's pipe. Thanks. And then I gave it another command, which is grep, which is basically like searching for a term. And then I gave it the term that I wanted. Cool. Just a quick down the rabbit hole kind of thing. All right. So now I want to show you this in Faraday. So you've probably done this before, but I just want to show you one more time. Let's make a new file. This needs to be a Ruby file. And I'll open Atom. Cool, here's my Faraday example. I need to like require a couple of things at the top here. I need to require Faraday. and I need to require pry if I want to do any inspecting, and I need to require JSON if I'm going to do any parsing. So I'm going to require all of those, and I'm going to do a Faraday get. I don't remember like the exact syntax, so I'm going to go over to the Faraday usage page, which is nice. And it's like, oh, here you go. Like you can like hit this request like this. So this is what I'm going to probably just take. And then I'm going to change the URL to be my URL. Also, I have this other thing that's kind of cool, this copy clip thing that just like keeps a history of my copied clipboard. So it's kind of easier for me to go in and like grab things that I used to have. This is called Copy Clip. It's a Mac OS app. Okay, so I want that, and then I need to replace, I need to do a couple of things. I need to replace this username with my username, and then I need to, yeah, I think that should do it. Faraday's nice and easy like that. And then I'll put a pry here so I can inspect my response. And this is just a plain Ruby file, right? I called it Faraday example. So this is something that you'll do when we get into the kind of like you try it section. I'm gonna do a Ruby Faraday example, run it. Cool, looks like things went swimmingly. And if I look at my response, what type of object is this response? Just by looking here on my screen at like the top line here. Yeah, go ahead, Jesus.
Is it like a Faraday object?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it is. It's a Faraday response object. And you can tell that if we kind of think back to our mod 1 days of really like digging into objects, that's what it is, because we can see like this top line of our pry shows what was returned when I typed in response. And so indeed, this Faraday get request gives me a Faraday response object, which then I can parse by using my JSON library. I can say JSON.parse. And actually, before I do that, let's look at this. This response object has a couple of things that I can check for. Response.status. Great, it's a 200. Response.body. Great, that's some JSON, right? Not formatted yet in a Ruby way, but a way that I can see, right? So now it's got the body in the payload. And if I want to turn this into a nice Ruby hash, I can use my JSON library and I can say, I want to parse the response.body. Great, now it's a pretty hash. It's Rubified. I can treat it like a hash and dig in how I need to. Questions on this? I know y'all have probably, this is probably review, but I wanted to show it. Okay, let's do this. We've been going 22 minutes. Let's take a break, and when we come back, it'll be like y'all get to go do stuff the rest of the class, and then we'll kind of do like a you do for a little bit, come back review, you do, come back review, and that'll be the rest of the class. All right, so let's come back at 57. Thanks, 57. Okay, it's 57. So let's come back together. Cool. So I went through those examples, I would say rather quickly, which is, something that should be a pace that at this point you're probably used to. And now I would love for you all to give this a shot. So I dropped a repo into the chat, and it's this Pets API. The README of that repo has the URLs and the expected responses for those URLs. And real quick, I'm going to show you the first one in Postman because I already kind of like have it loaded up. So One thing to note too, also, just want to say this out loud. You don't need to clone this repo. You don't need to do anything to this repo except look at the README and try to hit the endpoints. Like this repo lives alone. The server is running, like because it's pushed to Heroku. I reset it. There's some data in there. All you have to do is hit the URLs. You don't have to do anything like locally with the repo. It's just look at the README. It'll have the instructions for you. Okay. Yeah, and here it is. So let's look at this first one. Request a get to this URL. Great. I'm going to go in Postman here. And I'm going to say, cool. Like I've already got it loaded up. Postman's kind of nice. You can like create little collections of API endpoints that you've had in the past. And here they are. Boom. Easy for me to reference. So I've got the URL. I've got the verb correct. I think I've got everything I need. I don't need any extra headers or whatever. And I hit send. Cool. And I get this payload of JSON data back with my pets here. And it looks like, it's a collection of them that I get back. Now, something to note, get request, give me the resources, right? It's not going to change any data. However, all of you all are going to be like doing this exercise at the same time with the same database. So you can expect the data to be consistently changing as groups work through this like exercise and start to like send put requests or send, post requests, create new data. You can expect the data is going to change, and because you're all using the same API, the same data. So just expect that. And what I would do is I would say, how I would go about this is I would look at the README. I'd say, okay, like let's hit this first endpoint. Cool. Let's hit it in Postman. Let's hit it in Faraday. Let's move on. All right. And that's how I would go about this exercise. Hit it in Postman. Feel good about that. Inspect it. Cool. Hit it in Faraday. Okay. Feel good about that. Expect the same thing. All right. Moving on. And so I'm going to have y'all in pairs. I don't mind how you do driver navigator if you want to do that way, or if you want to like say like, hey, we both want to get the practice on our computers. Like, let's do it separately and then use each other as a resource. That's fine with me as well. However you want to do it. But we're going to take about like 20 to 25 minutes. And what we'll do is we'll come back and I'll have like a couple groups go through the endpoints that they got to. And then we'll break again, another 20-25 minutes, come back and review, and that'll be it. Write down questions as they come up. I don't expect y'all to just fly through this. I expect there to be some roadblocks, some pain points. So write those down and make sure to ask them when you come back. Any questions on what I'm asking you to do? All right, we'll have one group of 3, most groups of 2. I'm going to open up these breakout rooms.
Hey y'all, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Hey, good.
I just I ran into it was like a 765 error, the no token or unexpected token error, and I was just curious. I've run into that a few times and I haven't quite figured out how to.
What client were you using when you ran into it? Was it Postman or Faraday?
I was using Faraday.
Okay. Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, of course. Can you see the screen?
I can see you.
Okay. I think that's, what is this file called?
Pet exercise. Okay, so we ran into what, 156? Huh, that's weird because those aren't like, that's not something that you wrote. It doesn't look like.
And so if I put the pry up a line, I can hit the pry.
So it's
but
in
it
the
seems like,
JSON library, huh?
yeah.
Interesting. Let me see what version of this gem you have. 2.5, 2.53. Okay. So the things that I see here that's like throwing me a little bit in this error is this. It looks like it wants to grab from the JSON gem in 253. Arben 253. Oh no, maybe I'm wrong on this. Okay, 250. No, that looks okay. All right. So let's look at response.body before we look at the part, before we try to parse it. There we go. So this is what I'm seeing here. It can't parse an empty string. And this is like this is the issue that we're running into, is basically like you think you're hitting the endpoint and like getting, whatever we expect to get here, but instead we're getting nothing. So we're getting like, an empty string, which then JSON's like, I actually don't know how to parse this because it's empty. It's not a JSON. It's not a JSON.
Okay. So I guess maybe two questions. One is there any way, if I toss a pry into here, is there any way to confirm that I made a proper connection and my connection object has been successfully sort of like made, but also like authenticated and the request has gone through?
Yeah, so this request shouldn't require any authentication, but you can check at con. Or maybe you can't right here, probably. Well, we're inside this all pets. So let's see if we can check what con is, or at con, yeah. Okay, so that looks fine. Let's try to, yeah, let's see. Let's do a response.status. Okay. Interesting. 404. That tells me 404. What is that one again? Like unauthorized or something? Let's do response dot. Hold on, I'll just look it up real quick. Mistyped uniform resource locator. 404 error indicates that the server itself was found, but that the server was not able to retrieve the requested page. So it looks like our URL has an issue. And I'm not seeing it just like off the bat, but like, let's try HTTP instead of HTTPS real quick and just see if that gets us anything different. 404 still okay. So,
and
yeah,
I guess my other question is like, at which point will I know that like I would want to actually take off this and put it in front of the GET request? Like, when does that matter?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that is actually probably what the issue is here, because I think so here's what I would do here in this case. I would say, since you're abstracting away the .new, and like, are you abstracting away, like you're connecting to the Faraday object and then you're doing the GET request, what I would do is I'd back up an entire step here and be like, okay, like, let me just try a simple GET with the entire URL and let Faraday like do that work for me. And let's see if I can get that to work. Because if I can get that to work, then I know that like, okay, my URL is correct. It's formatted incorrectly when I do it with the .new way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so it looks like, yeah, it was exactly what you thought.
So I guess I don't yeah, so is it typically that it's like, I want to take the base URL and then everything from that URI put up here?
Exactly. Yeah. So you got it
Okay.
exactly right. So, and that's, it's sometimes it's not totally clear what's what, but I would say like, yeah, everything after the .com, we consider the URI, and then everything like from the protocol to the .com, we would consider the base, like the origin URL.
Okay. And then, okay, so you're saying, so if I'm not getting the correct response, I can toss a pry in and then just do response.status will kind of give me the info that I need, or it'll sort of tell me like whether I'm authenticating or whether it's been a successful response.
It'll at least tell you, yeah, whether the, you know, the request was successful. And so basically that's what it did, is it told us it was unsuccessful, because 404 is basically like, hey, I hit this server, but like this URL actually, like the entire URL, like, or the specifically the URI of the URL that you requested isn't formatted correctly. So like, we don't know how to go where you asked to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a few more questions if you're down to kick it. I was working through, these are like the mod 3 exercises, like some of the API ones.
Yep.
And so my mentor and I actually were working through this, and I had everything set up correctly, but the taco randomizer was essentially redirecting us. And so the only way that my mentor was able to get it to work is to require Faraday, or sorry, middleware, and then allow for redirects to take place.
Yep.
But without the redirects, like it was working perfectly in Postman and it was just not working here. And I think I just am curious to hear why.
Totally. Yeah. So this is like a Faraday quirk, right? Where the middleware that Faraday is using by default doesn't allow enough redirects, or maybe any redirects. I'm not totally sure. I know that there is a part of this. There is like a link in the Faraday docs. So I'm going to drop those in the chat real quick.
So this is just a way to override the default and say like, hey, actually give me a limit of 5, but allow for them to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. At the bottom of this page, it says like, hey, like there's like a link, like learn more about middleware. And I think that that's kind of like where we would go in here and see like, okay, like what is the default? Because whatever the default is like kind of like abstracted away. And like, then again, like how do I override whatever the middleware like generally has defaulted to?
Okay.
And
do you know what the adapter does?
Let me see. Default adapter. I do not. I'm not like super familiar with that now.
Okay.
Let's see. But I mean, what I would do is I would just say like, okay, what is the Faraday? Like I would just Google like, hey, Faraday adapter. Because usually that's just like something that like you don't have to set by default. What is it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So there's some built-in adapters. It's how, okay, so it's how the request is turned into a response object.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is like kind of like it's how you're building both like either, well, I should say either the connection object or the response object. And those are like, you can build those slightly differently, it looks like, depending on which adapter you use.
Okay. Can I ask you one more question?
Yep.
So in these exercises, you have to authenticate for music match and the Marvel service. And I was running into an issue where essentially, like if I pry into any of these methods, I use Figaro to create an application.yaml file.
Yep.
But I haven't been able to feed in any environment variables. I get errors. So I've been having to hard code the API keys.
Yep.
And so I guess I just have questions about sort of like how the environment variable files work and maybe like where they need to live and like whether I should be using .env or Figaro and for what reasons maybe.
Yeah, I mean, Figaro is kind of like the go-to, but it's not the only one. But like the one thing I'll say is the Figaro, if it's not working, what I would try to do is like delete everything and do the Figaro install again and see if that like will, somehow like I would basically like try to like install Figaro again because possibly there's an issue that happened when you tried to install it. Because it kind of abstracts away to like how those environment variables are when they are made available and how they are made available to your Rails application. So the other thing that you could do is like in your pry, you could set an environment variable with either figaro.env and then assign it, or just the global env and then the the actual name of the variable, and then you could assign it that way. So there's like a couple ways you can work around it. Generally, this is the way that like we want you to do it because it kind of like this file in theory takes care of that for you and then loads it up at the correct time and is avoids being pushed up to GitHub. So that's kind of like the benefits. But if it's not working, yeah, you've got a couple of options. It's like set the environment variable manually, retry installing Figaro or just like hard coding it, which is what you've been doing.
Okay. So if I open up a pry and then I set my own environment variable, will that persist? Like, will that get added to a YAML application, or is it like just for that instance to make that one call in that one pry session?
Be for that specific execution, but like I would like this is like a good thing to kind of dive into. There's like other ways to like set environment variables like in your not just like in your Rails application, but like in your terminal, like at this specific location, you can set some environment variables. Like if you want to, like, hey, I just want these set for just this specific directory, and then loading them up is like this other process that Rails does that like you probably has a few steps in it, but it's kind of like a way to get familiar with like how environment variables are set or not. And like this is going to be like a common thing that you have to do in every environment, right? You're going to need to have it in development, staging, production, and the way that you set those will be probably like slightly different each way.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have to get running or
yeah, I got to bring y'all back.
Okay, cool. Later.
See ya. Good questions though. All right, very abruptly, you all are back. There's one group I didn't get to that asked for help. I think it was Jake, but I could be wrong. If you ask for help, do you mind just telling me if you want to ask the question now or if you'd rather ask it in the breakout room later?
No, it's all good. Trevor and I were having a little bit of issues with the post, but we got it figured out. And then we're on the delete thing when we were brought back.
Love to hear it. That's great to hear. See, this is what I should just not respond more often. No, I'm just kidding.
Please don't do that.
I'm kidding. Okay, how about this? Yeah, we went for a little while, so let's take another break and then we'll come back and I'll ask a few of you to share. So let's come back at 30. Okay, cool. It's 30. I want to start with Andrew. You have a question?
Yeah, so I was wondering about like I'd never done like a Faraday.post or .delete or anything. Would most APIs you find online only allow you to get, or are they all kind of just available to be manipulated by anybody?
No, I would say most APIs are only going to let you do a get, and they're going to expose like information that you can retrieve, but they're not going to let you manipulate data. necessarily, unless you authenticate and you say like, hey, I am, this GitHub user. Then there's a chance that you can like also like create data to your account through that API. But generally it won't be set up like where you can delete or post or do whatever you want like we've kind of given you access to in this API, just because that would be chaos and like it wouldn't last very long.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, cool. So yeah, I want to actually, so I was in Kyle's room a little for a little bit, and Kyle, I would love if you would share and we could recreate that error that we saw, just so we can kind of like see what it was, what our process was for figuring it out, and then yeah, let's go from there.
Do you?
Yeah, let's put it one
is it-
below so that we hit that error. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So this is how I don't know. Can you all see? It's a little small for me.
I can make it bigger.
Yeah, if you do that, I think Command Plus will get it bigger, I think. I want to say. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, cool. So let's look at this service class real quick. So Kyle's got his service set up to basically start a Faraday connection on line 16 and with the .new, and then outside of this class, he's like instantiating the service, then calling all pets, which happens to call into this connection method on line 8, and he's got the URL kind of set up on 16, and then the get to this specific URI on line 8. Any questions about this setup? Okay, can you zoom in on this a little bit, Kyle?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we got this error, JSON parser error, unexpected token at, and then that looks like a string. And okay, I want to kind of open this up to y'all. What would you do if you get this error? What's a step you might take, right? Because we have the prize on line 10, but the error happened on line 9, so we never really get to line 10. What do you do here? Cool. What's up, Ben?
I would maybe see what the response variable is, what that's giving us, because it looks like we can't parse whatever body that is.
Great. So how do we do that?
If we move the pry up above line, yeah, up one. Let's see if we even hit it.
Love it. Looks like we did. And now you wanted to see what about the response?
Yeah, if you just see what the response is, if you just hit enter, let's. Is that struct a regular thing for Faraday?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so we've got the response object built, which is, a good sign. And then is there anything about the response that we could look at that maybe would give us some more information? Yeah,
go for it.
Let's hear from Angel.
Did you do response.body?
Cool. Empty string. Okay. Now this tells us what?
That there's nothing to parse.
There's nothing to parse, correct? And so our body came back empty. So our parsing error here is because JSON.parse doesn't know how to parse an empty string. It only knows how to parse a JSON object. So we need some content in there for it to work. Go ahead, Hope.
It also means that something in your request is structured wrong, be it the params or maybe the way it was split to use con wasn't correct, or
Yeah, totally love it. So what's another thing we could check as part of this response that might give us a clue into what went wrong? Yeah, go ahead, Jake.
The response dot status.
Yeah, let's check it out. 404. Okay. Anyone know what a 404 is? I know I didn't know it off the top of my head, but I went to the Google machine and figured it out. Yeah, go ahead, Genevieve.
Page not found.
Yep. Cool. And so the reason for that is the reason that Hope gave, that our request was structured incorrectly. The way that we had split up our new and our get wasn't quite right. Right. And so this is like a good process, though, of like we always have a body, we always have a status that we can check on our Faraday object. And those are probably the first two places that I want to check. And then I want to experiment. So in what I told Kyle I would do is I would try just the Faraday.get, feed it the whole URL and see if that's correct. Because if that's correct, then I know that I just split up the URL incorrectly with the new and within the con.get. And so Kyle kind of like didn't need that step. He went right here. And indeed, if you do it this way, which some of you probably know from doing it, this is actually how it expects to be split up, with the base URL as the connection object, and then the URI, the specific URI here in the get argument. Okay. And so this is what needs to happen for Faraday to behave properly if you're using a .new. Questions on this? I wanted to go through this process because I thought it would be valuable for y'all to see, because this is going to happen. I know it is. Okay, cool. I want to see this post. So I'm going to probably, I'll open it up. I'm either going to pick on Jake, or if someone else wants to show the post, then I'd love to see it from someone else as well. So I'll open it up. It looks like everyone wants to see Jake do it. Okay, great. Let's see Jake do it.
This was a mistake all around. So we're not nearly as cool as Kyle was. We were just doing the Faraday.post.
You mind just zooming a bit? I know I have like poor eyesight, but I don't know. Maybe the rest of the class can see.
Is that all good for everybody?
I can see, yeah.
Okay, let me also clear all this up. We were having some issues with delete, so I'll bring this back. So we were just posting this way. This is what you want to see?
Yeah. So talk me through what's happening on line 5.
Okay, so first of all we did was we did a quick little Google machine action and found the same page that you were on. And so we're just kind of trying to follow this format.
Cool.
And so we knew that this worked from pulling it from the GitHub repo, and all that was working good. We took off the ID because we're posting to it. In here, we have our hash. We first tried it with quotes around here. That didn't work. We then tried with quotes around the keys. That didn't work. But then after doing that, it all seemed to work okay. So we run this. We have our parsed, which comes back with a new ID of 114, and it all seems to be going okay.
Cool. Yeah, I like it. So this is a good a good example to show, because you had to go to the docs, right? You formatted it incorrectly with your syntax a few times first. That is what we should expect as well. But then you were able to like trial and error, get it to send across the way that our API endpoint was looking for it to come across. Yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
So when we make a post request, we actually like will get a response that mirrors that post request to sort of confirm that that was successful.
Generally, there like this is a helpful response from the API, right? That is like basically saying like if we looked at the status, it would be like 200 or 20. I think it would be like a 201. Let's look at the status actually. Let's
Sorry, it's
see.
201.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So 201 is basically like, yes, like things were good. The object that you expected to be created was created, and then it sends you as the payload in the response the object's attributes, basically. So this isn't like necessarily how all APIs are going to be set up, but it's how this one is set up to kind of like both confirm via the status and the payload that like, yep, this was created. Here's what it looks like now. Cool. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
I was also looking at this. It also seems like just the way Jake has it set up, like with the parsed, if it didn't work, parsed would be nothing. Because I kept looking at it and I was like, how is it just giving him the one object that he created and not everything that's in there? But like just by virtue of having that set up like that, like it would be empty if it didn't, or error out, I would imagine.
Yeah, we'd probably get an error somewhere, probably similar to Kyle's error, honestly, because if it came back as an empty body, then we'd get an error on line 6, the same one, and it'd be like, hey, I can't parse an empty string. Yeah, so like something to think about there. And then the other thing to think about is this is likely hitting a create method, right, in our controller, which is going to be different than an index method, which gives you which is like returning all of the pets. This create is like, hey, like go and create all of this pet with these attributes. And then at some point it's like, okay, like it's basically saying like JSONify this object that was just created and send that back as part of the response. And if you're interested in seeing like how that works, then you can hit that pet, you can look at the pets API repo, go into the controller and like see exactly like what's happening here to then return the 201 and this specific object. Cool. Okay. I'm going to have you all continue working for the next like 15 or so. And if you got through this, which like I'm sure some of you have, at the bottom of the lesson plan, there's like the API exercises for mod 3, which has like, I think three separate APIs that you can mess around with some exercises. But yeah, what's up, Doug?
So I was noticing something in our second GET request that we do where we're looking for a specific ID, that when you, and maybe I just did it wrong, but when we ran it through our Ruby object, we had to specify in the URL ID1. However, when we were doing it in Postman, we left the colon ID and we specified the path variable of ID to 1, but it doesn't seem like it ever changed the request. And I was curious if that's happening behind the scenes or if that's passing it as a different type of data or how that's working.
I gotta see these to kind of like follow along.
I can show you. I think I was Doug's partner there.
Okay. Do you mind zooming in? Sorry, it's gonna be like
Don't mind at all.
A broken record at this point.
Also, real quick while we're at it, do you know how to change this from hot dog to hamburger or vice versa?
I don't.
Weird.
Yeah. Okay, so you have it in there as pets ID1 and it's a get, and then in the params, are you passing anything? No, it doesn't look like.
We have it as 5, and this is just Dns ID, I think was the.
Okay, cool.
Should do like 1. That's weird. Oh, that's age. That's why.
You stopped sharing. Not sure if you saw
I did.
that. Yeah.
I did not see that. Sorry.
That's all right.
All right. I might be in the wrong spot.
This is interesting. Okay, cool. So I think I know what's going on. All right, so let's get rid of this like form data None. Yeah, let's make it none, so it's not distracting, because I want y'all to be.
Cool.
Yep. Okay. And then so let's go up to the URL. Delete the ID part. Oh, why isn't it showing it? Can you click on body? Okay, cool. So go to params. Great. Okay. So without that dynamic segment, it doesn't even show up in Postman that you can set this path parameter. So now type :ID. Yep. Now you see that path variable just populated right there. That's not going to populate unless you have the dynamic segment in there. And so now you can set this with a value of whatever ID you want in the path, and it will kind of like do that under the hood. Whereas the other way that you could do this is you could just not have the dynamic segment, and you could hard code 1 into the URL. And then, so basically it's like allowing you to be like, hey, like use the dynamic segment and we'll give you this option to set that value. Or if you want to, you could just put 1 after /, in the URL, and that would work the same way.
So yeah, and that's kind of what we saw. And I was curious if the path variables, if that's under the hood, just rewriting the URL to be pets1, or if it's actually passing it as some other data type that the API is using in a different way.
That's a great question that I don't know for sure. I'm assuming what's happening is it's building the URL under the hood with this path variable before it sends it. That's my assumption. However, like I could be wrong about that, and it could be passed in like some weird header that then like the API responds to. I doubt that's the case. I imagine that they build the URL first, then send it.
Okay, so that's just going to be something that typically, if we were putting it into our Ruby, we would get rid of the .id, put in whatever ID we wanted, and that would be the standard way. We're not missing some other piece that.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Yep. So, and I think if you're interested to see how Postman sets path variables, like Google machine it and see like what actually happens there. So yeah, so good question, Angel. You get to those fancy path variables when you type :ID or whatever you type, :status, anything as part of the URL, then Postman will generate that path variable option like on the fly. Yep. Cool. All right. I'm going to open these rooms. We've only got like 10 minutes, but yeah, use it how you see fit, and we'll come back. Yeah. At around 58.
Looking for. And so I was getting an error, so I have to like keep up to date here. So I think this will work, and that's probably my issue. But I refactored into this connection.
Cool.
But like before that, I was trying to pass a parameter because that's how Postman did it, and I couldn't figure out how to do that. But it looks like this worked. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a good example of like why we don't design APIs this way, where anyone can just like delete data at will, because then you're like, imagine, as a developer, you're like, oh, I thought I had this record and now it's gone, and there's no way for me to like keep track of that. So, but yeah, that's exactly it. And I think like there's probably a way for you to like set, maybe there's not. I think that like I've only seen it this way, where you hard code the ID that you want as like part of that dynamic segment. But there might be a way to like set a path variable as part of this like object, the connection object, but I haven't seen it done that way. So I would do it this way.
Cool, because I wasted a lot of time trying to do that.
Yeah, generally we'll just hard code the ID that we want. But really what this would look like, if we were like connecting to this API and we let the user pass it in, right? We would have like pets, params ID instead of 36. And then we take like whatever the user like asked for and say like, okay, like now we're gonna like, the user said, you know, go get pet 36 or whatever. Or maybe the user said like, grab like a pet with the name of this. And then we pass that as the param if the API gave us that option, and then we do a find by on that end. But like there's a couple of ways to do this, but like for this specific endpoint, like this is the way I would do it.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was making it too hard.
That's all right. Any like closing thoughts? Any final questions that came up? Or you do, if you give me a reaction if you like Postman. Okay, got a couple. Sweet. Okay, good. Love it. Kyle, what's up?
I'm curious, in Postman, there's a spot to run, it's like pre-request scripts, and it's like use JavaScript with that. I'm curious, what are the scenarios in which we would actually need to use that or want to use that?
Great question. There is actually, Ian has set up a test suite for Rails engine, which you'll do in weeks 3 and 4, where the he's set up a JavaScript test suite to assert like some responses, assert some truths about the responses. So that would be one scenario where maybe you want to set up a test suite to ensure that like, hey, like the responses are indeed what I expect. Another scenario could be like, hey, like we need some JavaScript to run, like our application expects like, you know, some sort of like JavaScript function to run and like pass some kind of parameters like via JavaScript that like the server will be expecting. And so that would be like another scenario where maybe you'd like want to set that up because you can like, you know, pass a form with JavaScript and like kind of like pass it that way. We haven't really done that, but that's something that's like possible. Like Postman is not obviously just limited to like our Ruby and Rails world.
So would in that context, would it kind of be for you testing your own API to make sure that the functionality is, so Postman's also kind of a test suite for yourself?
Yeah, exactly. You can think of it as like it's a tool where like you're building an API and you can constantly be like checking like what's happening on, like with the response and ensuring that like, you know, it can handle maybe like some edge cases that happen. Like, hey, what if I pass like I also pass this param? Can like my API handle that, or does it screw it up? Like this is like a great tool to like kind of like do some of that testing.
Thank you.
Yep. Cool. All right, I'm going to drop this form. It is today's class survey. Here's what I'll say about class surveys. They don't take that long. They're super useful for us, and they help me make this class better the next time around. Not just this class, but also the next class I teach. So I would say it's in your best interest to take a minute and fill out this form for me. Last mod we got, I would call it below average to minimal responses, and that was very sad for me. So I would love for you to fill this out, even if you don't have like words to say, just like a 1, 2, 3 click on the questions. That is super helpful for us. Yeah, that's all for me. I think y'all have like PD work